Yep. All right. So before I start, I'd like to read a Bible verse from Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of your Lord your God. So this verse is quite important to me because I was brought up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and I've always gone to church on Saturday with my family my whole life. But as I grew older, I got put on my heart and convicted that I should not work on the Sabbath. I should honor the Sabbath the way the Bible asks us to. And initially that wasn't a problem when I was younger, but when I started working, I started facing difficulties basically with work because of the Sabbath. I was required to work on the Saturday. So through this journey, I've grown my faith and learned a lot of things, and especially that if I trust in God, He will always if I trust in God and rely on His promises, He always come through. So I work for a medium-sized automation company, industrial automation company, and the clients that this company has, nearly all of them work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we, as a company, are responsible for providing support for them basically all the time. So there is no downtime for these companies. If there is, it has to get resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise, you can basically lose your contract with them. That's one of the requirements. So that's a big service that our company provides. When I first started working for the company, I didn't know this was the case. And in my interview, when I interviewed with them, I told them that I can't work Friday nights and Saturday nights, but I didn't mention why. I just said it's something I can't do. And I didn't mention it's a religious reason or it's something that is non-negotiable, which I probably should have at the time. And they said, no, that's all right. We don't work that often on Saturdays, and it won't be a problem at the start for you. And I probably should have told him, but I didn't. And at the time, I really wanted the job, so I just said, I'll cross that bridge when it comes. For the first 2 years, it wasn't a problem because I didn't have many responsibilities and I never had to actually work on a Saturday. But when I gained more responsibilities and had more work in the company, I got put on as a lead programmer for one of the biggest quarries in New South Wales that was getting built. And I was told that towards the end of the project, there would be a commissioning period that would last between 3 and 6 months, and I'd have to travel to New South Wales, to Goulburn, and work there, so work on site. And at the time, because I never really spoke about my religion to anyone, no one really knew I didn't work on Saturdays, and I just assumed they weren't going to be working on Saturdays either. I said, yeah, sure, I can go up there for 3 to 6 months. And so I was put on as someone who knew everything about the project so that I could go up there and, assist in all parts of the project and see it through its whole phase. 2 weeks before I was meant to go up, they informed me that I was going to be working on Saturday and I had to work every Saturday for the 3 to 6 months that I'd be there for the whole day. And that they had no one else at the time that was going up with me because we were sort of a small company back then and it was about 5 software engineers and no one else was able to commit to that whole period to travel. So I told him straight away that I can't work Saturday, and it's not because I don't want to or because I've got like soccer or something on, but it's because I actually go to church and it's something that is really important to me to keep the Sabbath. And I told them about my religion for the first time, and they understood, but they weren't very happy with me because I sort of ruined all their plans, and we were so close to starting to commission, and the project was sort of going downhill from like a project management point of view. So there was a lot of pressure on us. There was a lot of timelines got pushed down, and so that night I went home and I was really anxious. I didn't know what to do. I had no solutions. I sort of thought through my head every possible thing I could say or do, and they all didn't really make sense. So I sort of decided that I'd give this problem to God and pray to Him that He find a solution for me, because I didn't want to lose my job, or I didn't want to, look like an irresponsible worker. I sort of wanted to find a solution that would work for everyone. And the next day when I came into the office, I got called into a meeting, and they basically said that there's no problem, that I would still be going up, but I wouldn't have to work any of the Saturdays. And I was surprised and asked why, what happened. And they said that one of the colleagues who was also working on this project, who initially said that he wasn't able to commit to coming up to New South Wales, he had issues finding a rental property. And because the accommodation up there was free for 6 months and he had no other plans, he decided that it would work, best for him to go up there, and basically that way he'd have accommodation, and he didn't mind working up there. So that was the answer to prayer that I thought sort of came out of nowhere, because beforehand I didn't really want to travel up as well, but because there was no one really to travel because everyone else said no, and it was my first big project, I thought I sort of would do it. So yeah, that was like a real big answer to prayer. And after that, I thought, all my Saturday issues would be resolved within the company, that now they knew that I don't work on Saturdays. And unfortunately, they didn't fully understand what it meant to me. And so they just thought that it's like I don't work all day on Saturdays, but I can sort of work from home or sometimes work. And which is probably my fault. They didn't explain it properly. But and so when you gain more responsibilities, there's a policy within our company that basically you get put on like a 24-hour support roster, which means that every week on your rostered week, you have to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for that week to be able to answer the phone or travel if need be, or provide support remote or on-site. And I got put on that roster, which gave a problem for me because I didn't work on Saturday. So I initially didn't learn anything from my first experience and tried to solve this problem myself. And so I was asking all my other colleagues every time it was my week if they could take my Friday night and Saturday. And initially people said yes, but after a while, no one wants to give up their weekend if it's not their week, and they had plans and so on. And they started to say no. And one week when it was my week, I couldn't find anyone. And so as a last resort, again, I prayed to God, and I sort of said, God, you need to help me here because I don't know what to do. And I basically prayed to God. And that week, when I asked a colleague, I said to him, can you swap with me for the Friday and Saturday? And he told me, yeah, sure, which is normal. But then he said to me, look, I've got Wednesday nights and Thursday nights where I've got commitments, and they're weekly now. Are you able, and I know you're always looking for someone to take your Saturday, so are you able to swap with me, and I'll take your Saturday every time you're rostered on, and if you do my Wednesday and Thursday nights. So I said, sure. And just like that, another prayer was answered. And the solution was just so simple, and it came so quickly. And so for about a year, that was our little arrangement. And so I didn't have any issues with Saturdays again in the office. But after a year, he left, and which basically made me worried again. But this time I said, look, God, you came through for me twice when I asked. I'm going to just surrender this whole problem to you now. I'm not going to worry about it. I know that you have promises that you give us, and we lean on these promises, you will come through for us. And there's a Bible verse that I remember reading that said, it's from Psalms 55:22. It says, cast your burdens on the Lord and he will sustain you. So I cast this burden to the Lord, and I said, I'm not going to worry about it, just see what happens. That week, I have a colleague who's this elderly Russian Jewish. He's Jewish, and he came up to me and said, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "I'm not. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist." And we shared our beliefs a little bit. And he said, "I asked because I noticed that every Saturday you don't want to work." And he said, "I'm not a practicing Jew because I work on Saturdays, but I'm in the community. There's a big community, Russian Jewish community, and they do observe the Sabbath. And I know how important it is to them, and I see how important it is to you. And I respect it, and I want you to keep your Sabbath. So if you want, I can take all your Sabbaths. So every time you're on call on the Friday night to Saturday night, during that period, I'll take that on call for you. Just no strings attached. She just wanted to help me out. And so, again, another sort of prayer was answered, and he's been taking my on-call for the last 5 years. And he even comes up to me sometimes and says, before I even ask him, he's like, "Are you on call this week? So you're going to swap the number on Friday night, Saturday night, do you remember?" And I don't even have to ask him. So, so these are my experiences at work. And there's many other times when there was like a deadline that ended on Saturday where I had to work, and supposedly it was unmovable, and then last minute it got changed. And I've been working in this company for 13 years now, and still have my job, and Saturday's not been an issue anymore. I'd just like to say that if you ever find yourself in a situation where your faith is being tested, I encourage you to trust God's promises, and he will always provide, even in ways that we didn't expect.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. Next, I'd like to invite Margie up to join us. Lovely to have you here, Margie. Now, you seem to have been at Burwood for as long as I can remember. I think you were here when I started coming. Has this been your home church since forever, or...?
No, it hasn't. I grew up in Lilydale Church. Actually, I was born in Hobart.
Yeah.
So I spent the first 3 and a bit years of my life in Margate Church in Hobart, just after my mum became an Adventist.
Okay, so you grew up as an Adventist?
I did. So my mum, not many people know about my family. No one really here has ever met my family, but my mum is an Adventist, my dad is not. And they've been married for 54 years this year.
Congratulations. That's impressive.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I didn't grow up in this church. I actually grew up in Lilydale Church. There's a bit of a story behind it. My mum became an Adventist through Adventist World Media down in Tassie, and was baptised into the church. And because of that, when we started going to school, Dad really wanted us to go to a private school but couldn't afford it, and Mum said, "How about the Adventist schools?" Hint, hint. So my brothers, I've got 2 older brothers, and I all grew up in Adventist schools. We all grew up in the church. My brothers don't attend church anymore. First answer to prayer is that my niece and nephew are back in an Adventist school in the last year or 2. But no, I grew up in Lilydale Church, and I started coming to Burwood in around 2013 when I got back from living in London for 7 years.
London sounds like an adventure.
It is.
Yes. I think God did some things for you when you were over there, right?
He did, but I wanted to take it back a little bit before that. So most of you know I work as an occupational therapist. When I went through school, Adventist school, I lived every day with headaches from about the age of 15, and I knew that all through school I had this yearning to work in a hospital. My family come from a line of health professionals. My brother and cousin are 5th-generation nurses. My other brother's a paramedic. And I knew I wanted to work in health, but I kind of knew I didn't want to be a nurse. Mum had kind of said, "Look, I'm a nurse. There's other things you can do. Look into OT." So I did. And the year I graduated from high school, the score to get in was nearly as high as medicine. It was 96 point something, and it was the only degree in Victoria at the time. And I knew there's no way I'm going to get into OT, because living with headaches every day and trying to do year 12 was not easy. So I did my research, and I found out sort of back entry ways to springboard in. The first year of uni, I started a Bachelor of Health Sciences, and I was still going to Lilydale Church when most of my closest school friends went to Avondale. So they all took off. I was still going to Lilydale, and I started really struggling to be at church, and I struggled to be at uni because I knew this is the degree I really didn't want to do. And I remember walking into Lilydale Church thinking, I feel like a stranger in my own church that I've been in since I was 4. Really, because most of my closest peers were up at Avondale. And I guess the first really momentous answer to prayer I remember, just pleading with God saying, I don't want to be in this degree. I don't want to be where I am in life. I'm not happy. My friends aren't here. I feel like a stranger in my church. You know, whatever it takes, just get me out of this position. At the end of the year, I wrote to the School of Occupational Therapy and Speech Pathology. And and I got accepted into both degrees and had to choose. But I feel like that was a gift handed to me, being able to say it wasn't on my own merits that I got into that degree. It was because God knew that that's where I needed to be. And it was a lesson to say, I want you there, but I want you to understand that I've got your back and I've got you there for a reason. I've been an OT now I'm in my 23rd year working full-time as an occupational therapist. I've been so blessed to have the opportunity to go and work in the UK. I'm a dual national. My dad's British. And again, so many answers to prayer. And I guess that's my theme today when Lani asked me about talking about God's impact on my life, is realising God just wants a relationship with us. He wants to hear from us. It doesn't matter whether we're angry, frustrated, stressed, happy. He just wants to constantly hear from us. And there's been times in my life where it's always the last minute. So I was living in London in a bit of a stressful situation. My landlord and his partner owned the house, and they were living in the house, and they were not in the greatest of relationships. And I needed to get out of that house, but I had nowhere to go. And every time I put in an application to go somewhere else, it would fall through at the last minute. And it got to crunch time, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And one friend said, look, I'm leaving London in 6 weeks' time. You can come and bunk down and share a bedroom, which wasn't the easiest thing to do. But it buys you 6 weeks to find another place to live. And so I kept looking and kept praying, and again, houses would fall through, and literally the 6th week, that house came through. It was a house full of 5 other girls. None of them were Christians. I didn't hide my faith. They knew I went to church. I learnt a lot living in a house full of girls. But again, it was just that last minute always coming through, not necessarily when we expect it. So stressed, but God's got my back. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
And I guess the last story or a couple of other bits I wanted to share was a few years ago, I'd been living in house shares for years, and I started wanting to get my foot into the housing market and be in my own little property. And I started looking, and it was, I know the market has changed so much lately again, but it was right at the peak of the market, and I had looked and constantly prayed to God and giving it to God, going, wherever I'm going to be, I know that this is going to be, your will, your guidance. And so it took me a year. I'd put in multiple offers that had fallen through. Had gone through the whole pre-approval. I'd done all the searching, all the bidding, I think I looked at over 100 properties before I actually got a property. But I do think God's got a sense of humour, because I ended up moving to Lording Street, and it was the 7th property I'd put an offer in on. So, yeah.
Yeah, so, you've seen God always come through for you when you turn to him.
Yeah, I truly have. And I think the one last thing I want to mention is that some of you know that I was in a relationship in COVID and he passed away, but I've really seen God's hand through my entire life. It's not always the answer to prayer that we expect or that we want. We come to God sometimes with a wish list thinking this is what I want and this is the timing I need it or want it in. And to me, it's never ever worked out like that. It's always been very last minute, but on reflection you can see God's totally got my back and he's totally got my best interest at heart. When Frank was passing away, he was in hospital up in Queensland. It was in the middle of COVID lockdown. I hadn't seen him for months because of lockdowns, and he was in Brisbane and I was in Melbourne. And I believe over that time he was starting to find God and reach out to God. And one of the things, he never asked me for gifts, but one of the things he said to me was, I'd love a Bible. And I'd love a Bible for my birthday. He passed away 6 days before he turned 46. And I managed to leave work on the Friday, purchase a Bible, get it in express post, and it made it up to him on the Monday. And people were saying, even in Express Post, in the middle of COVID, things were taking a week to get interstate. I don't know whether he ever read it, but he had it in his hand a few days before he passed away. And I just see in my life God leading me, God answering prayers. People know I'm now in a relationship with a lovely gentleman in the corner. But yeah, I guess my whole life has been constant answers to prayer. I go through times when I'm really empowered to read the Bible regularly, and I'm guilty like everybody else. We get tired, we get lazy, we watch TV, we're busy with work. But the one thing I've never let go of is having conversations with God. And I believe that God doesn't mind where we are, what part of our life we're in, or what room we're in. He just wants to hear from us because he wants a relationship with us. And I truly believe that God's timing is always perfect. It's usually last minute because, that way you have no other option but to say it's from God.
It's amazing sometimes when you look back on how God works things out and then you realise you were stressed for nothing, right? Because God had it under control. But at the time it felt like the end of the world and so difficult. And
I think our human nature is too to go, I'll give God 90% and hang on to that 10% of stress and worry. That's our human nature, and we constantly do it. I'll give God my job and I'll give God my house, but I can't let him have the relationships as well. I can't let him have that one little thing that's that thorn in my side. But I think he's constantly reminding us that, hey, I want all of it because I can carry your burden. I've got the strength. When you're weak, I've got it.
Thank you so much, Margie.
Thanks,
Let's give her a hand. Thank you, Margie. And now I'd like to invite Nadia to come and join us. And for those of you who don't know Nadia, if you were here, was it last week when you told that amazing children's story, or the week before? I can't remember, where her wonderful husband was Crease, dressing up as all the church members. I don't know if you remember that one, but grab a mic. That has been my favourite children's story for a long time. So thank you, Nadia, for that. How are you feeling today?
I think good. Let's see how we go.
All right.
I feel like I need a stool from the beginner's Sabbath.
You want a shorter one?
No,
Maybe
I'll be right. I'll manage.
You're all right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Or maybe I'll stand. Can I stand?
Yes, of course.
I'm going to stand. Sorry.
Whatever is comfortable
I'm
for
messing with the routines.
Just whatever works.
Beautiful.
So tell us how God has worked in your life.
So I'm going to just start with a bit of a story, and then I'll come back to how God has moved in my life. I know there is a potluck lunch waiting for us, so I'll try not to interrupt and go for too long. But I just want to set the scene. So my husband Reese and I, we've been married for 7 years in March, so next month. And, thank you. And when we got married, we hadn't necessarily discussed a timeline about starting a family or when we were going to kind of try for kids and all of that. We were like, oh, we know we probably want to have them, but that's kind of as far as the discussion had gone. So we don't need a lesson on the mechanics of reproduction. We do understand how it works. However, we didn't think that it would happen after one time without the necessary precautions. So Christmas about 3.5 years ago, Reese and I were installing a washing machine in our laundry. And I noticed I was sort of feeling a little bit off after visiting family in Christmas. It was about 3.5 weeks after. Reese was wrestling with this washing machine, and I was in that position where I was kind of I'm here, but I'm also not really helping. But I feel like I need to be here, but also I'm not helping. So I was I might just sneak off and take a pregnancy test. So I was I really doubt it, but I'm not helping, so it's just something to do. So I went and grabbed a pregnancy test, took the test, and much to my surprise, it was positive. And I kind of looked at it for a second, and I was oh, okay, cool. So I went into the laundry where Reese was still wrestling with this washing machine, and I held up the pregnancy test to him. I was so Reese, I'm pregnant. And he let go of the washing machine, and he turned around and he said something to me that I will never, ever forget. he turned to me and he said, "Are you going to help with the washing machine or not?" And then we just didn't talk about it for like 2 weeks. Now, we did get the washing machine in, and we still use it to this day. So that was, success. And then also, as the pregnancy progressed, and then our wonderful 2.5-year-old Spencer came along, we very quickly realised we were actually very fond of parenthood. And it was not this big, scary, this big, scary thing that we'd built it up to be in our heads. So, yeah, we felt really blessed that it happened to us unexpectedly and quickly. So it was a no-brainer for us when this time last year we were actually pregnant with our second son. We'd had a very normal pregnancy. When I say normal, just, feeling sick all the time, running around after a toddler. It was very standard. Sorry. So we had a scan at about 11 and a half weeks. And I think like most couples, we waited to that 12-week mark to really give that big sigh of relief, to be like, we're all good, we can relax, we're safe. So we had a scan about 11 and a half weeks. Everything looked great. So we head off on a family holiday to Adelaide. We visited family. It was a really good time. Then when coming back, we had a routine scan booked. By that time, we were almost 14 weeks. So I went to the scan by myself because I was expecting 5 minutes, we'll be in, we'll see Bub, we'll head out again. I was yapping away to the lady, just like, as you do, small talk, whatever. And she just sort of said, she was like, I just need to go talk to the doctor for a second. And I was like, yeah, no worries, because in my head, I'm like, well, 12 weeks, we're all good, sweet as. So I hadn't even really considered that she was going to bring me back something that, was not really good news. So she came back into the room and she said to me, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but I can't find a heartbeat. I'll need to send you down to the hospital." And even then in my head, I was still like, oh, sweet as, they must just need better technology or a better sonographer or something at the hospital. That's totally fine. So I kind of went to the front desk and I was still kind of blissfully unaware of I suppose what she meant in that moment. So they called my GP straight away and I had to go straight to my GP. And it wasn't until I drove down to the GP and then she said to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm actually going to have to send you through a clinic that specialises in late miscarriage or second trimester pregnancy loss because it looks like the baby stopped developing this morning or yesterday. So you're almost 14 weeks, so we're going to have to send you through a special clinic." And it wasn't until she said that I was kind of we've actually lost the pregnancy. I'd had this feeling of safety. And so I was really wrapped up in that, having made 12 weeks, that I just did not click until she said it to me really straightforward. So that kind of week, it was a bit of a blur, really busy. So I went home, or I called Reese, I can't remember, went home and told Reese or something. But we then had the task of unannouncing the pregnancy, because when we had that scan at 12 weeks, we went ahead and we told all our family, told all our friends. We did, I think, what a lot of couples do at 12 weeks, and we'd started to dream big. I'd pulled out maternity clothes to start to sort through things and just try and be organised and look at what life would look like in another 6 months. And so there was a lot of backpedaling in the next week. We also had a lot of hospital appointments because we learnt that after 10 weeks of pregnancy, so the chances before 10 weeks are 25%, which is a really unfortunate statistic. But as you head into the weeks following that, by the time you get to where we were, the chances of losing a pregnancy are 1%. And so what that indicates is that there's either something underlying with the baby or there's something underlying likely with the woman's body that means that she can't carry the pregnancy for whatever reason. And so we learnt that week following the loss that, we would have months and months ahead of us of testing. So it wasn't just going to be this kind of I mean, I don't want to say any miscarriage is straightforward, but it wasn't just going to kind of be this process of just moving forward. There's going to be a lot of testing before us to see if there was going to be an underlying cause that would impact our future to grow our family. So that was on a Monday. I had the surgery on the Friday to remove the fetus, and then he went off for biopsy over the next few months. A week after that, so the Friday after the surgery, a week after the surgery, we were due to go to big camp. And I was feeling very on the fence about going to big camp because physically, like, my body was still registering that it was no longer pregnant. Hormonally, I was all over the place. And just emotionally, like, I was just coming to terms with this change of plans that had been sprung upon us, and that feeling of safety that I had that had just kind of been then ripped away. But we did decide, we were like, no, let's go to big camp because it'll be really good for our family. I think like any parent, you kind of put your needs aside and you look at the needs of your children. We're like, it's going to be really good for Spencer. And Reese very gently reassured me. He was like, well, we can turn around at any time and we can just go home if it's too much. So we headed off to big camp, and I was feeling very withdrawn from the whole experience. And so when the programs were on in the evenings, I didn't really engage. I wasn't necessarily angry at God. It wasn't anything like that. But I think I knew I didn't want to hand it over to him because I was like, but then if I give it to him, it's no longer mine. And if it's no longer mine, then I can't wish for it to be different. I don't know if that makes sense. But I was kind of like, while I hold on to it, I can keep imagining a different outcome. Whereas when I give it to God, then it's kind of like, it's finished, you know, like it's his and it's not mine anymore. And so I had this real thing where I was just kind of really withdrawn from God. Like I was not angry with him. I wasn't like, I can't believe you caused this to happen, because I didn't believe that. I just didn't want to give it to him because I wanted to hold on to it. I wanted it to be mine for a bit longer. Anyway, so I don't know if you remember, if any of you attended Big Camp, there were these huge cattle yards right at the back of Big Camp, and they echoed a lot. So if anything was going on in the cattle yards, you could hear it down the other side of camp. So there was this church or this group, I actually never got to meet them, but they would often sing in the cattle yards at all kinds of random hours of the evening. And I don't think everyone truly appreciated that. But I must admit for me, and it's no coincidence for me that the song was in the praise service today, but they would sing that song Praise on repeat. And it was often after the services. So we're talking like 11, 12 o'clock at night. And so I would lay in the tent and I'd be just crying and crying, like I avoided the services. And I just retreated into the tent, crying and crying, and I would just listen to this song on repeat. And then towards the end of the camp, I had this moment where I was like, okay, God, well, like the song says, as long as I'm breathing, I've got a reason to praise the Lord. I was like, fine, I'm breathing. I praise you, take it. Like, whatever. And I wasn't like enthusiastic. I didn't run to him. I didn't leap and bound. I dragged myself there. I was like, fine, I'm still breathing, but that's literally all I've got because I'm so sad right now. And I gave it over to God. And I pretty much just said to him in that moment, I said, I know you didn't cause this, but please just show me that you're good. Like, that's all I need to know, is that you are still good. So the very next day, we'd had this lady camping next to us. Reese and I had never met this family before. But she was this really lovely, vibrant, bubbly lady. She was so lovely. And every day she'd said to me, she's like, oh, come and have a cuppa, come and, be so lovely to get to know you. And I wasn't feeling particularly social. And so I'd said to Reese, I was like, can you just go and chat to this woman? Because I don't feel like it. Not in a way that meant to be rude or anything, but just in a way that was sort of like, I just don't feel like being polite and happy right now. It's not my time for small talk. So Reese went and he sat with this family and he chatted with them for a while and he's like, oh, they're really nice. And I was like, yeah, I bet they are, but I just don't really feel like it. Anyway, so then on the very last day, so kind of I was listening to that song and I gave it over to God kind of the second to last night. And then on the last day, this same lady that was tented next to us, we happened to meet outside of these cattle yards because our kids were playing together. And in my head, I was kind of like, oh, Spence, thanks a lot. Like, don't you know I've been trying to avoid small talk? Like, thanks heaps, bro. And so we were in this position where we crossed paths and I couldn't avoid it. Like, I couldn't be rude. I just couldn't, dodge the situation. And so we started chatting. And honestly, within about a minute, she brought up that quite a few years ago, about 10 years ago, she had had a pregnancy loss, and it was still something that she found, quite heavy on her heart. And then I kind of like unraveled, and I was like, well, last week this happened to us. I had surgery a week ago. I'm still really struggling to come to terms with it. And believe it or not, she had had a pregnancy loss at the same gestation, so almost 14 weeks of pregnancy. And so we exchanged tears, like we skipped the small talk. We exchanged tears in front of the cattle yards. And this woman, she just spoke so much life and spoke God's promises to me. And she was like, Nadia, did you know when you received that news, God was there. He was crying with you. That was his child before it was yours. God had dreams and plans for that child before you did. And then she just kept repeating to me over and over. She said, you cannot forget, don't ever forget, especially in moments like this. She said, it is the enemy that comes to kill, to steal and destroy. But God has come to give life and give it to the fullest. And so I really felt like when I took my tiny bit of broken praise, which honestly, it was pathetic. Like, I was so sad and I was so in the dumps and I did not want to give it to God. But then the very next day, he came back at me and he showed me his goodness through this woman who had the same, well, not the same, but almost the same experience.
I can't talk right now. Yeah, wow. That's an amazing story how, God was there for you, right? And brought that woman into your life at just the right time to just to remind you how much he loves you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important that, sometimes people come up and talk about, the wonderful things that happen in life, and that's great and everything, but life can be hard sometimes, and God's there in the sorry. It's not my story.
No, it is. Please go.
I'm sorry.
No, go.
Yeah, so did you have something else you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just wrote down, I suppose, like my summarising thoughts, and I did write them down because I don't want to keep us here all day, because over the last year, that was just the beginning of God showing me that he was good. Like, truly, that was just the beginning. When I took him, my tiniest, measliest, most pathetic, it's not pathetic, but my most broken little bit of praise, and I was like, okay, God, I'm breathing, whatever. Like, just, I praise you. That's all I can give you, though. God has just continued to show me he is good since that moment. So I wrote these down just so I can articulate myself well, and I don't want to keep you all day. So my first thought is for those who have or maybe one day experience a loss in this space. I want to say this to you. Death never has the final say, including these circumstances. Now, the Bible doesn't state specifically or word for word what happens to babies of pregnancy loss, but what we do know is this. Genesis 1:27, God created all of mankind in his image. Jeremiah 1:5, before God formed us in the womb, he knew us before we were born. Before we were born, not after we were born. Before we were born, he consecrated us. Psalm 139, he knits us together in our mother's womb. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. So when we piece these things together, we can hold on to the truth that preborn or miscarried, stillbirth and aborted babies, God considers all of these children of his. Every child ever conceived, not just born, but conceived, bears the image of God and is regarded by God as a child of his. So when we align all of this with the character of God, we can be sure that on that resurrection day, pardon me, it's contagious, those children of ours, who were first children of his, they will join us in full health and full happiness when he takes us home to heaven. I'm almost done. So for those of you who this space is totally unrelatable for you, I have a thought for you as well. My other learning through this experience is this. God is good all the time, but life is not. The enemy will do anything to convince you that God is not good. It is his mission to steal, kill, and destroy. Whether that's through shame and self-doubt, self-sabotage, marriage challenges, addiction, self-esteem, death, losses, hurts that we have no control over, the list is endless. The enemy will spend your whole life trying to convince you that God is not good. So if you're feeling unsure about God, or if you're feeling sure that God is not good, you know what? I want to say fair enough, because life is exhausting and the battles are wearing. But I want to end by challenging you to ask God. You can drag yourself there. You don't have to run. You don't have to be smiling. You don't have to have energy. But take yourself to God and ask him, God, show me you are good despite everything life has or is throwing around. Prove to me that you are good in this moment. You have nothing to lose by putting that plea forward to God and seeing who or what he sends you to show you his goodness.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Nadia.